The first key difference between polar opposite ways of thinking. Welcome. Weak versus strong, the mindset. Emotional maturity. Doesn't say much though, does it? Shall we take it from the top then? First things first, to make the difference clear, puberty is for the body and maturity is for the mind. Our focus here is the mind, after all. So we'll begin by asking the right questions. What is maturity? How does it work? What role does it play? Why is it important? Emotional maturity is the one crucial thing that separates, or at least it should, adults from children. Physical age does not necessarily reflect a person's mental capacity. Usually, it is believed that an older person will always be wiser. That used to be the case, because back in the day, way back, only the brightest minds were able to study and gain knowledge and power. It was believed that the older the person was, the more knowledge they had, and thus, they are smarter, wiser, more mature. With the world changing at the pace that it is, it's become easier to obtain knowledge, regardless of a person's level of emotional maturity. Also, between knowledge and maturity, knowledge is learned and stored, well, most of it, which gives it an advantage when seeking to obtain it. Whereas, emotional maturity is developed. Education does not define maturity. Nor does age. Why? Because there are plenty of examples when children become geniuses at an early age. So what does define emotional maturity then? Well, let's take a look. For the sake of the argument, let's take a quick look at autism. People with autism, or signs of it, may become emotionally impaired, and in some areas their development gets stuck, so to speak. Usually, social skills and communication take a hit. Now, depending on the severity of autism, some people are able to retain their learning capacity and are able to achieve educational heights still. The movie The Accountant is an example of such, even as a movie. Of course, if autism is in its severe stages, then the learning capacity drops as well. The thing with autism, it does not impair puberty. It only affects the mind. Once the development of the mind stops, the person displays childlike behavior, depending on exactly which developmental stage, aka the age, the mind got stuck on. That is why some people with autism are able to take care of themselves. Think of the movie I Am Sam, from 2001, as an example. At the same time, some less fortunate ones have to depend on others to survive. The movie The Black Balloon from 2008 is an example of such a case. Both movies illustrate people with autism and their lives, as well as the people involved around them. Now, in the I Am Sam, the autism-affected man is an adult, by his biological age. But somehow, he is unable to learn how to operate the coffee machine in his place of work still. A task that some children would also be unable to perform. However, Sam is able to do other, simpler things. Because those tasks are simple and repetitive, and do not require a combination of complex actions to achieve a result. For example, operating a toaster is easier than operating a barista-level coffee machine. The same principle applies to how children are able to learn their alphabet or nursery rhymes, even without being able to read yet. As long as they listen to it enough times, they are able to repeat it by copying the sounds. Sometimes repetition of simple moves, acts and behaviors do not require an understanding of how the thing works. On the other hand, The Black Balloon shows a family whose son has severe autism, to the extent that even his speech and behavioral patterns are affected. As a result, the boy is only able to express himself through sounds and simple actions, like a toddler would, when they are able to walk on their own, but can't speak clearly yet. These two examples illustrate the point of an impaired mind development. In other words, they show what happens when the mind is not able to mature alongside the body and gets left behind. In contrast to this also is true when a person is emotionally mature beyond their age. Why or how that happens can be for a number of reasons. The most common trait of that is when children say or do things that one does not expect them to do till later. Children undergo various developments in both body and mind as they grow up. Losing the egocentric perception of the world is one sign of a developing maturity. For instance, when a child shows concern or thoughtfulness for another. For a child to be able to express those feelings, they need to have a certain level of emotional maturity and understanding of the world. The difference between an impaired and a well-developed emotional maturity is the understanding of the world and communication. Repetitive actions do not always require an understanding behind the action. Memory recall, or the ability to solve equations, is an action. Contrary to action is something called an ability. It displays a person's capacity to be able to understand how something works. That is the key difference between action and ability. For instance, to see someone cry and hand them a tissue is an action. Understanding why the person is crying in the first place is an ability. The ability, capacity, to understanding things stems from a person's maturity of the mind. Action without understanding holds no meaning. Kind of like an apology when the person apologizing has no clue what they did wrong in the first place, or rather, does not understand why their actions were in the wrong. Simply doing something is not always enough. The importance of that will be discussed in another post. Right now, we'll circle back as to why emotional maturity is important. Humans are social creatures by nature. Some more than others. People are also emotional beings. Some more than others, but the fact remains. To be able to have and sustain successful and meaningful relationships in life, a person has to be able to understand other people. In other words, to successfully communicate with another person, one must first understand their feelings, emotions, words, and behavior. The ability to do so is referred to as emotional intelligence, and maturity is the cornerstone for it. Of course, communication and emotions are not the only thing that emotional maturity plays a crucial role in. Or rather, the lack of it. There is thinking, reaction, and other things. All of which are covered in other posts. Spoiler alert, most of them will circle back to the same point: impaired mental development. Depending on which stage, the age, the development got stuck on, the level of emotional maturity varies. The more impaired it is, the more likely the person is to be of a weak mindset. A real-life case study will explain more.
When lack of emotional maturity risks another's safety. This is a real-life example of a person endangering the safety of a child due to their own immaturity. Now, before anyone says anything, the child was not harmed. However, that does not change the fact that the person, an adult of the age of late 20s, early 30s, did put the safety of a child at risk. The incident happened at a camping site when a male was asked to bring an axe to help chop some firewood for a campfire. The man did indeed go and get the tool, but failed to bring it back because he stopped to chat with some other campers. Seeing the opportunity to catch two birds with one stone, the man gives the axe to a 5-year-old child to bring it back to the others, so that he could stay behind and chat some more. Luckily, the child's mission was intercepted by another adult and nobody got hurt. When confronted about his choice for giving the sharp object to the child, the man only answered with, "I told the girl to be careful with it." This situation shows at least 3 signs of immaturity: distraction, irresponsibility, and failure to commit. Let's take a look at these in more detail. Distraction. The person's immaturity caused them to sidetrack from the task at hand. The axe could have easily been brought back to the rest of the companions, and the man could have gone back and chatted with the other campers after. However, because the person is immature, they chose the easy way out: stay and chat, and get the axe to where it's needed. The priority of chatting now outweighs the priority to finish the task at hand now and enjoy the leisurely activity later. The pleasure is put forward the responsibility, thus bringing us to the next sign: irresponsibility. Due to the lack of maturity of the person, the man fails to comprehend the fact that by giving the axe to the 5-year-old girl to carry, they are putting the child's safety at risk. Regardless of the fact whether the girl would have been able to deliver the tool safely or not. Right now, the focus is not aimed at parenting. That's for another time. Right now, the focus is about an adult tasking a child with something that is a potential danger to the child's health and safety. This action and thought pattern can be compared to a child running around with scissors. Children tend to do potentially dangerous actions because they lack the emotional maturity and the understanding of danger. This is evident in the current example too, as the man does not even question whether or not his actions are correct. And the last part, failure to commit. Now, this is closely related to the other two. If the man had completed his task as asked, none of the rest of the situation would have occurred. As a result of immaturity, the man fails to complete his task because he 1. Gets distracted halfway, and 2. Is irresponsible. The same is true vice versa. Without irresponsibility, the man wouldn't have gotten distracted. It's a vicious circle. The psychology behind the current example is rather simple and self-explanatory. Because the person, the adult, was immature, they failed to prioritize and judge the situation at hand. As a result, the safety of another was put at risk. The only upside of the situation is that nobody got hurt. However, the all's well that ends well mindset is that's something that allows for the weak mindset to get away with things, because its best excuse is nothing happened this time. And once something does happen, it's never the weak mindset's fault either. The blame game is strong. There is always someone else to point a finger at, which is also a strong sign of an immature mind. But about it more another time. That's the end of the case study.
Welcome back. It is only fair to say that not all mental development problems are related to illnesses or pathologies. Sometimes it is a question of nurture and mistakes of it. Another spoiler alert, this blog will focus on social impairments, which stem from weak mindsets, leaving the medical problems to the pros. So then, back on track, a weak mindset will, most likely, be immature and lacking in understanding, as well as analytical abilities. On the other hand, mature people, or rather, emotionally well-developed minds, are better at understanding and analyzing, which makes them of a strong mindset. Sometimes the differences are quite minor and are easy to miss, which might be why people have trouble understanding each other, especially if the person in question is well off. When the focus lies in appearances, it is easy to overlook the true nature of a person. It is easy to find answers when knowing where to look for them, and that is exactly what psychology does. It shows all the right places where the focus should be aimed at for better chances of successful interactions. Not convinced? Confused? No worries. All will make sense soon enough. You have reached the end of this post. Thanks for listening, stay tuned for more, and always remember, mental health is important. Take care. If any of this made you think about where you stand, good. That's where change begins. Sometimes we don't need answers, just the right kind of questions. And if you ever feel like you could use a place to pause, reflect, or just figure things out, you'll find a few ideas waiting for you at the Jazz of Psychology. We'll be back soon to see what else happens inside the mind.
Welcome. Weak versus strong, the mindset. Perception. The second key difference between polar opposite ways of thinking. Perception is closely intertwined with emotional maturity. Either one can indicate the level of the other. How so? Because perception reflects an understanding of how people see certain things, which, as we know, stems from emotional maturity. Now, because we have already covered maturity, this time we'll take a closer look into perception. As closely as it is related to emotional maturity, perception can also act as an independent agent, Perception can also be referred to as perspective. It implies how someone sees something. If emotional maturity is developed, then perception can be taught, learned, and experienced. But perception has one crucial advantage over emotional maturity. Perception can change. If maturity has difficulty advancing further in some cases, after getting impaired, then perception is able to change regardless of that. For instance, like trying a new diet. Say someone who has been a hardcore meat lover hears of the advantages of veganism from a very reliable source, like a friend. After a little while, the person decides to give the vegan life a try and falls in love with it. Why, who knows? Maybe the person simply trusts their friend enough to take their word for it. Or they truly enjoy the new diet. We may not know the level of the person's emotional maturity in this example, but we do know that after a certain event, their perception changed from a meat lover to meatless. Of course, the opposite can also happen. Due to the lack of understanding of a certain topic, a person's perception cannot be changed no matter what anyone says. For example, a person is convinced that reptiles have no emotions because it's a lizard. As such, they disregard any stories of a pet iguana being capable of expressing its mood. Because the person is certain of their perspective, they are not able to see another perspective, meaning that the person's perception of the topic did not change. So what that indicates is 1. The person has strong beliefs on the topic. 2. Believes to be more right because of them. Which leads to 3. Their emotional maturity probably hasn't reached the point of being able to understand another person's perspective by words alone, without experiencing the event personally. A real-life case study will explain more in a second. A weak mindset often displays a rigid perception of things, because the weak mindset believes to be right about things, just because. Usually this is described as stubbornness. Of course, not compromising on certain things is not necessarily a bad thing, but more on that in a separate post. Right now, we'll circle back to our case study.
This is a real-life example of when the same situation is viewed as complete opposites. Picture it, a single house in the middle of nowhere. Literally. Surrounded by nothing more than rye fields as far as the eye can see. Or a drone. Pictures are taken from above and shared of the location described. Looking exactly as described, a single house with nothing but empty fields surrounding it. With only one 80-year-old living in that house. The caption above the picture says, "Our beloved house. Such a lovely view." True. For a person that perhaps grew up there and now has an elderly parent living there still. However, the same picture can be viewed as quite a lonely view too, when considering that it is a single house in the middle of crop fields, with an elderly person living there alone. The key difference in perception of the current example lies with the emotional attachment for the people seeing it. For someone who sees a lifetime worth of memories in those pictures, they would see them as lovely. If they had a positive attachment to the place, which is evident in the caption. Now for someone who does not share the same emotional attachment to the place shown in the pictures, logic dictates that the pictures seem anything but lovely. Which is understandable, because the judging of the view is based on a different perspective. Time for some psychology. Emotional attachments happen to people all the time. Be it a pair of favorite slippers, car model, TV show, a couch. You name it. The difference is that a weak mindset will, most likely, have a stronger emotional attachment to something, to a point that letting go is not an option. You know when kids have a favorite toy or a blankie? Something that they must have at all times with them? Something that, if gone missing, will be on par with a national security level alert? Children do it because their minds become attached to items emotionally, without a logical explanation. Why? Because children do not need logic. All they need is that item. The same principle applies when an adult has a weak mindset. What happens then is that a person judges situations based on the level of their emotional attachment, and at times fails to adequately judge a situation. A strong mindset is able to judge their attachments differently. It can be based on an item's usefulness, durability, or an emotional event. Either way, At some point, a strong mindset will be able to detach and evaluate the same situation from a different perspective. This is the end of the case study.
Welcome back. Because the person is certain of their perspective, they are not able to see another perspective, meaning that the person's perception of the topic did not change. So what that indicates is 1. The person has strong beliefs on the topic. 2. Believes to be more right because of them. Which leads to 3. Their emotional maturity probably hasn't reached the point of being able to understand another person's perspective by words alone, without experiencing the event personally. A real-life case study will explain more in a second. A weak mindset often displays a rigid perception of things, because the weak mindset believes to be right about things, just cause. Usually this is described as stubbornness. Of course, not compromising on certain things is not necessarily a bad thing, but more on that in a separate post. Right now, we'll circle back to psychology. So then a strong mindset differs from the weak mindset because it is able to accept, process, and compare different information from the one in possession to be able to make their own judgment of the topic. That is why a strong mindset is able to change its mind, whereas a weak mindset will struggle in that department because of the hindered analytical abilities. To be able to convince a weak mindset to change its perception can be done in 2 ways. 1. The new information must come from a source that is highly regarded by the weak mindset. Or 2. There has to be enough numbers who share the same opinion as the weak mindset on the topic at hand for the weak mindset to be convinced. Although the second one usually only solidifies the existing beliefs, but if approached by overwhelming numbers, it is possible to convince the weak mindset otherwise from their initial belief. Now let's circle back to the main point. Perception does not always reflect emotional maturity, but emotional maturity will always reflect perception. With the help of psychology, it is possible to notice these easily overlooked differences and work with them. Curious to see where this will go next? Stay tuned and find out. You have reached the end of this post. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for more, and always remember, mental health is important. Take care. If any of this made you think about where you stand, good. That's where change begins. Sometimes we don't need answers, just the right kind of questions. And if you ever feel like you could use a place to pause, reflect, or just figure things out, you'll find a few ideas waiting for you at the Jazz of Psychology. No love? No problem. Learn to see and listen to the world around you with the next post.
Welcome. The world, best research material. When real life becomes a source of case studies. If experience is the best teacher, then life is the best research. It's not necessary to develop a hypothesis and collect data through extensive experimentation in order to find something. With observation and analysis, everything in the world can become a case study with every living moment. All it takes is to watch and listen. Of course, asking a few follow-up questions would be perfect, if possible, but is not required. A lot of things can be seen and understood differently when observing the environment around a person. Not all public happenings are private, especially if they are shared willingly on social media. No, it does not mean eavesdropping on people's conversations or spying on them either. No, this is not gossip either. This is real-life research on the spot. There are plenty of things that people share about themselves without realizing it. like through a conversation at work by the water cooler or a post. All it takes is a walk down the street, a bench in the park, or standing in line at the supermarket. A lot can be said by the way a person carries themselves, how they construct sentences, what words and tone they use for it. Sometimes these things reveal more about the person's character and their mindset than the person is able to describe about themselves when asked. Psychology helps to pay attention to the usually overlooked indicators, allowing for a better understanding of who a person is. Think of it as gathering intel. It's possible to create an image of a person based on the intel gathered, even before finding out the real truth. It's a 50-50 shot that the assumptions will be correct or not. But those odds can be tilted with psychology. The better a person is at using psychology, the more they know of how it works, the better and more accurate the assumptions will be. Afterwards, it is only a question of confirming the intel. Of course, it is only worth noting that nothing in this world is absolute, and psychology should not be taken as such either. Mistakes happen. That's just the way of life. Now then, back on point. Because the purpose of this blog is to show how psychology, and lack of it, can influence people's lives. Merely describing psychology in general terms may not be enough. As such, there will be real-life case studies used as examples to illustrate certain points. The examples are a collection of observations and analysis from living in this world. Nothing more. For those who are concerned about privacy and personal information, rest easy. No such things are used. Besides the occasional details needed for clarification. That's all. The examples can be a decade old, fresh this week, or from 30 years ago. Who knows? Which is exactly the point. It's not about who did what and how. It's about what a mindset does to a person. It's about how the mindset influences a person's life and those around them. It's about providing examples of thinking and behavior. Not proof. Otherwise, this blog would be publishing academic-level case studies and analysis. If it's easier, think of it this way. Stand-up comedians often use their own life experience and events for their material. They also use other people's stories, or simply their observations about what they have seen some people say or do. At times the comedians will tell a story like that and include their inner thoughts that they had at the time the situation was happening. The case studies here operate on a similar principle, with the addition of a psychological analysis. The difference is the stories just sound less funny this way. But the point remains. Perhaps that is exactly why psychology is given such a hard time? When only psychologists can understand it, common people do not feel up for a challenge to try it out. Well, let's give it a shot and see what happens. You have reached the end of this post. Thanks for listening, stay tuned for more and always remember, mental health is important. Take care. If any of this made you think about where you stand, good. That's where change begins. Sometimes we don't need answers, just the right kind of questions. And if you ever feel like you could use a place to pause, reflect, or just figure things out, you'll find a few ideas waiting for you at the Jazz of Psychology. Ready for the next challenge. What is fear and how it works?